Hello everybody. Thank you so very much for coming back to my channel. I know I say that at the beginning of pretty much every video that I make, along with hundreds of thousands of other YouTubers, but before I started this video, when I was making like my little bullet point list for the points that I wanted to make, I was just kind of thinking how grateful I am to have as big of an audience that I do within the reseller community and outwards, and I just wanted to thank each and every one of you. Just going through my comments sometimes and seeing how uplifting and positive you guys are is amazing. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. So if you're new here, my name is Riley. You may know me over on Instagram as Honey Rags, and I'm a full-time reseller. I resell anything and everything. I recently kind of told you guys I'm going to talk more about my liquidation sales that I do over on eBay and on my fiance's account, which I am going to do, but this video I am keeping exclusive to the clothing aspect of reselling, hence the title. So I've been reselling clothing for a little over a year now, probably more like a year and a half to be fair, but you get the gist. Reflection of my first year reselling clothing, mainly on Poshmark, but some on eBay and Reselling too. So I'm just gonna kind of go over that. I'm not gonna go into like month by month numbers or anything like that. This is going to be more of like an opinion video, maybe a rant, whatever you want to call it. I'm just gonna kind of go through like the mistakes that I realized I was making that I changed, the pros and the cons that I've realized over the past year when it comes to reselling clothing. And I feel like I can make this video pretty fairly because I resell vintage and collectibles over on Etsy. I resell wholesale liquidation and collectibles over on eBay and my fiance's eBay. I have my foot in the door with kind of like almost all of the areas of reselling. So I feel like my opinion on reselling clothing is pretty fair if you're comparing it to reselling anything else, or not reselling at all, I guess. I am going to do a quick recap for those of you who are not familiar with me or how I started my resale journey. I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly because I know some of you do know. I started reselling on Etsy in 2016. Before that, I was helping my fiance resell things on his eBay account. He resells things from auctions and wholesale and garage sales and thrift stores and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of branched off into my own account called The Mecca on Etsy in 2016. Now, to sell on Etsy, it has to be handmade or vintage. They will not just let you sell anything and everything like eBay. So I specifically sold vintage items, and for the first year I was on Etsy, it was somewhere between a hobby and an income. I was only putting 10 hours a week tops into it. I was having pretty consistent sales because I had 300 or 400 active listings throughout the year at any given time. But I was also taking a lot of that money and spending it on fancy Pyrex that I wanted. So I wasn't taking it super seriously, but I was having enough sales my first year on Etsy to realize, okay, it's possible to make an income reselling. And I joined Instagram with a really small account for my vintage sales. And that's kind of how I found out about the reseller community, and especially the clothing reselling community, which is really tight-knit, which I thought was awesome. So at some point along the line, I felt like I was limiting myself by just selling vintage items. I would go to the thrift store multiple times a week, and I would go through the clothing every once in a while just to see if I could find something for myself, and I would pass up some really good brands that weren't my size or my style because I was just kind of too afraid to take the jump into reselling clothing on eBay. I couldn't tell you guys exactly when I woke up and decided I'm gonna sell clothing, but I do know that I went in all or nothing because I thought of the brand name Honey Rags, and I kind of just fell in love with that, and I knew I wanted to expand my horizons and not just sell vintage and collectibles because I knew there was way more potential profit out there for what I was doing. So I had kind of heard about Poshmark. I didn't think it was going to be anything promising because I felt like it was, I thought I was under the impression that people were literally selling things from their personal closet, which is I think how it started. And I downloaded the Poshmark app, and I think I listed 5 things on it. and I sold my first item on Poshmark overnight. I only had 5 things listed, and I woke up the next morning and I had a sale. And coming from someone who, you know, I know you can sit on things for months over on Etsy, I was like, wow. And that really motivated me. And from there, I spent like the next 2 weeks really just sourcing Goodwills all around my area. And I spent a couple $100s, which is a lot considering a lot of people say when you're reselling to start small, kind of like learn the ropes. But I kind of had the attitude that, you know what, if I spend a couple $100s on clothing and clothing resale doesn't work out for me, I guess that money was invested into my knowledge of reselling and what works and what doesn't for me. So I can't really say my first month was slow because I went in like all or nothing. Obviously, I had a lot of bad buys in the beginning, but I was having really good sales over on Poshmark, and it was surprising coming from someone who I knew eBay and Etsy like the back of my hand, and then going on this new platform and having a great first month in sales, considering it was my first month on the platform. I just haven't stopped since. So now you guys kind of get like the background, how I started reselling clothing. So now I can kind of go into what I've learned along the way. As you guys know, clothing isn't my main source of income, so I also want you to take that into consideration. Like I said, I resell anything and everything, so although I'm gonna give you guys my best advice, when I say something was a mistake, I don't want you guys to think if you're doing that you're doing something wrong. These are just kind of things that I've stopped doing, that I've learned to do better, stuff like that. So I'm gonna just talk about my mistakes first. The first mistake I made throughout my first few months on Poshmark was buying brands just because of the brands. I told you guys I kind of discovered the clothing reselling community, and one thing that I loved was label porn, where people, including myself, would upload a picture or a collage of pictures showing like Anthropologie labels that they picked up, and like Missoni and Clover Canyon and stuff like that. So if I saw a label that someone else said was working for them and I found that label in Goodwill, I would pretty much pick it up regardless of the style or color, or I don't want to say condition because I wouldn't pick up things that were in horrible condition, but maybe if it was in not the best condition, I would pick it up with the mindset of, well, this costs $300 new, so somebody's gonna want it for like 20 bucks. And the reason that was a mistake in the beginning was because I was picking up styles that weren't selling. Tank tops don't do really well for me. That was something that I learned along the way, is not just to pick up clothing because of a label. I had the problem with brands like Lafayette 148. The retail value for those is really high, and it really sells like hotcakes for some resellers, but the brand doesn't move the quickest for me. So if I were to find like a Lafayette 148 top that really didn't have any details to it and wasn't super special, I think at this point I would leave it behind unless I was buying it for myself. Another mistake that I made my first few months on Poshmark was sleeping on the shoe section. So I did not like reselling shoes. I didn't want to get into having to clean the shoes, having to scrub the shoes, having to take the marker off the bottom of the shoes. I didn't want to get into all that. So the shoe section at my local Goodwills were kind of an afterthought, and sometimes I wouldn't even look at them at all. Once I started actually looking into which shoes resell and what shoe brands to look for, and where I can source shoes, I realized I was really missing out in the beginning by not looking at the shoe section. I mean, some people, like, their main thing is shoes. I know a couple of resellers who, they only flip shoes. Now granted, I think they flip like new shoes, but regardless, don't sleep on the shoe section. If you're someone who sells clothing, look into the shoes. It's really not as scary as it sounds, scrubbing shoes and storing shoes. That was another thing I was worried about. I didn't want to have like boxes and boxes of shoes. But eBay shipping clothing prices. So this doesn't have anything to do with Poshmark. This is just eBay. When I first started reselling clothing, I kind of kept most of my inventory on Poshmark, and I would only sell maybe 1/4 of it on eBay. I was kind of a Scrooge about the 35-cent listing fee. I still don't have an eBay shop, neither does my fiance. We kind of like refused to get an eBay shop at this point. But I was kind of being a Scrooge about the listing fee, and I felt like customers on eBay are expecting to pay way less because it's more like a garage sale site or like an Amazon. So I only put about a fourth of my clothing inventory onto eBay, which was also a mistake. I'm not really going to get into that one. That one's kind of self-explanatory. But my eBay shipping clothing prices, so I didn't offer free shipping on my clothing just because I felt like, which is weird because when it comes to my liquidations and stuff like that, I offer free shipping. I don't know what it was about the clothing. I just felt like I didn't need to offer free shipping. But a lot of times I would put in like £2 for a dress, and shipping that to like California would cost the buyer like $14. So if it's a $20 dress, they're gonna pay $34 plus tax just to have it get to them, if you're including shipping. When I would actually package the item, if it did sell, I would realize it was like 8 ounces and I could actually ship it for like $3.68. So I was probably pushing a lot of customers or potential customers out by having these higher shipping prices. And the reason I think I did that was because when I sell something on Etsy, like antique ceramic dish or something like that, you know, you got to figure the dish is like 4 pounds. You got to put like a pound of bubble wrap and cardboard and boxes, and then by the time it's packaged, it's like this big. So there were a couple times I would get burned on Etsy where I would have to pay way more in shipping than what the customer actually paid because I had these huge, heavy, bulky things. And I was kind of just saving myself from getting burned on shipping on eBay when I would do like dresses and coats and stuff. I made the mistake of my shipping prices just being too high on eBay, and now I offer free shipping for most of my clothing. All of my new listings on eBay pretty much get free shipping. So, and I've noticed clothing is moving quicker for me on eBay because of that. The more you know. I don't even know if this is a mistake, but I just stopped doing it, was spending too much time in my descriptions. I see so many people on Poshmark who have the cutest descriptions with like little emojis, and they kind of talk about the style and how you could wear it. And it just reminds me of like a boutique. I really love that vibe. So I tried kind of like replicating it, and I was driving myself insane. Like if I had to list 30 items, I was spending way too long in the description department, you know, including the measurements and the size and the specific colors and the fit and what you could style it with. And it was driving me nuts, and I started to loathe listing certain items because I knew I'd have to have a description that was like 6 paragraphs long. So once I started cutting down my description and really getting right to the point, which is what I probably should have done in the first place because I was selling quantity, I realized, okay, listing can be a lot quicker if I don't put this much work into the description. Another mistake I made reselling clothing was picking up too many graphic tops. Those I don't really pick up so much anymore. I'm guilty of watching other YouTubers who will pick up like certain things that really just are promising for them. And I kind of took their word and took it to heart and thought if it works for them, it's gonna work for me. And so I did the graphic top thing where I would, if it was Disney, I'd take it home. If it was like a band t-shirt, take it home. That was a mistake because a lot of the graphic tees I just couldn't move. You can go to Five Below and get an assortment of graphic tees for like $5. You can walk into Walmart, you know, they have band t-shirts for like $10 new. It's a very fine line when you're selling graphic tees. It's a very fine line. Most graphic tees, unless they're like vintage band t-shirts, aren't gonna be worth more than like $20 used tops. Unless they're like a certain brand like Wild Fox or Junk Food, stuff like that. I'm just talking about regular graphic tees that really have no brand behind them to lift up the selling price. That was a mistake. I sat on a lot of graphic tees and I sold a lot of them for like $10 or $12, which, you know, Poshmark takes $3 of that. So that's something that I stopped doing. Well, now that I'm done with the mistakes, because if you're a new viewer, you're probably watching me thinking, why are you reselling clothing? It sounds like you hate it. I don't. I love it. I'm trying to be honest with you guys and reflect on my first year honestly. You can always get motivation and inspiration from people telling you what's working for them, but it's also nice to realize you may not be the only one who's doing something wrong in certain aspects of your business. So now I'm gonna go on to the pros of reselling clothing. And the pros, the way I explain the pros, I'm kind of comparing reselling clothing to reselling other things. Okay, so keep that in mind. They're really easy to ship. They're really cheap to ship. If you look at the big picture of reselling, one time over on Etsy, I sold a vintage wooden recipe box for like $17 and the shipping was $38 to Montana. Somebody actually bought it and paid the $38 shipping, but it just, you have to get the big boxes, you have to buy all the bubble wrap, you have to buy all the bells and whistles that you need to secure your packages when you're selling other things. With clothing, it was such an easy transition for me to just fold something up, put tissue paper on it, put it in a poly mailer, and send it out. So clothing is really easy and cheap to ship compared to other items. The damage risk is low. You don't have to worry about your dress breaking in half or shattering if it gets dropped on its journey to its buyer. Clothing is easy to find and source. That's another pro. You can do online sourcing. You can do wholesale sourcing if you want to do like more of boutique, however you pronounce it. You walk into any thrift shop, they have racks and racks of unlimited clothing that is almost constantly being flipped. You can go to the bins, they have mounds of clothing. If you don't know what the bins are, it's the Goodwill outlet. Clothing is always easy to source. Pros of selling clothing always sells. It may not sell completely consistently throughout the year. Speaking of that, December, it's usually a slow time for my clothing sales. This is usually when my liquidations and vintage stuff picks up, which it has, and clothing starts to slow down. But for the most part, I mean, people always need new outfits. People are always looking for new styles and new things to wear. So clothing will always be needed. That's not something that's gonna go out of style. Everybody needs to cover up their boobies, unless you don't want to. Free the boobie, I don't care. Another pro is it is fun to style. I actually love styling clothing. When I do my vintage clothing, which you guys know I'm a sucker for vintage clothing, you know, I get to put on a cute vintage outfit, take like a cute modeled picture, edit that picture a little bit if I have to. Be careful not to like edit the fit or anything. Obviously, I'm just talking about like editing like the background or the contrast or whatever. So yeah, it's really fun. I could go on and on about the pros of reselling clothing because there really are a lot. But now I'm gonna move on to the cons so that this video isn't like 45 minutes long. So the cons. I already covered this one, but I'm gonna say it again. Q4, which is the fourth quarter of the year as far as selling, is slow. So it may not be slow for you, but my personal experience, clothing sales start to drop down at the end of November. They really don't pick up again for me until a couple weeks into January. And like I said, I've only been doing this for a year and a half, so I can only say that's what was working for me last year. Clothing started picking up a couple of weeks after Christmas ended, and it really started to pick up in February. If you're someone who exclusively sells clothing and you don't sell like anything else, no hard goods, vintage, or anything like that, December may come and you may feel like this isn't for you and you got to find a new job. That's what happened to me last year, and that's what happened to me this year. Clothing just drops down no matter how much I share, no matter how much I source, no matter how active I am, it just starts to drop down. Another con is measurements. I have to measure all of my items. I measure every single clothing item that comes into my inventory. I have to measure around the bust. I have to measure the sleeve sometimes. I have to measure the length, sometimes the side length, inseams and front rises on pants. And clothing can be time consuming compared to other items because of the measurements. Obviously, I've gotten pretty quick at it. It's not the end of the world that I have to throw in a couple of extra measurements. That's just a con if you're comparing it to other things that you don't have to measure. Another thing I want to talk about is steaming. I have to steam everything that comes in. And the reason I say I have to is because I've just developed like this weird OCD where in my head it is not ready to be presented unless it's steamed. Like I even steam new with tag items that I find at the thrift store. I don't know why. I could probably save myself a lot of time and stress if I didn't steam everything, but I do. So this may not be a con for a lot of you who don't steam every single thing, but it is a con for me. This one may sound stupid because it's self-explanatory, but it's a con to me sometimes. When you're used to bringing in inventory where you can set it on a table with a small lamp and take pictures of it and list it and you're done, it can be a rough transition when you start reselling clothing and you actually have to form everything to a mannequin or stylize it or even fit it on yourself. I procrastinate about listing clothing the most. So if I bring home a box of liquidation, a box case of like liquidation items, I usually get that listed the same night it comes home to me. Whereas clothing, once I actually bring it home and I steam it, it usually hangs up on a rack for a while before I actually get to listing it, because really just fitting everything, making it look good on a mannequin or on yourself, or even if you're just hanging it on a wall, you know, you gotta put the pocket, you gotta button everything up. This sounds stupid, but coming from someone who's used to just like taking a couple pictures of something and then you're done, taking pictures of clothing can be the worst. Sometimes it will take me like 2 hours to get through like 30 items just to photograph, because I feel like I have to fit everything perfectly or else you're not really capturing the style of the garment. So some of you may have watched this and thought, why is she complaining about everything? Just keep it to yourself, like nobody cares. But I watched a couple of other YouTubers, honest reviews of like reselling, and it kind of brings you back down to earth. Like, you're always gonna have the show. I'm guilty of it. I'll post Poshmark packages and all these liquidation palettes that I'm just rocking through, and all these awesome clothing brands that I can't wait to list. But you know, there is human error behind that. There is procrastination behind that. It is a job, you know. I've made a video before, is reselling your dream job? For me, yes, it is. I love what I do, but I'm also allowed to struggle with some things, like having to style clothing. It drives me nuts. It's a pro and it's a con, because it's fun to style clothing, but it's also time consuming compared to other things. So yeah, wow, I have been talking for half an hour. This is crazy. This is a longer video than I normally do, so if you have made it this far, wow. If you've made it this far, tell me your favorite clothing brand that you like to wear in the comments. I'm really just curious to see how many of you actually listen to all of this. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys appreciate my advice and my rant. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description to my Instagram. And as always, happy selling.